All right, so here is the this wine app. So it's deployed on on the internet. We can add some stuff. And now if you happen to be looking, you should see that third one there as well. Okay, so we've been, so far, actually throughout this entire course, we've just been working locally with local development servers and development environments. And today will be the first time where we actually take something that we're making and put it on the web for anyone to see. So I'm just going to go through quickly, do some copy paste just to get this thing running. So this is going to be a Django project. So I've got my virtual environment set up here. So Django admin start project. And there's just one small difference. So this is just a matter of basically stylistic preference. If you don't want that, root directory to be called the same thing as your project. It's totally optional. And then we'll do start app wines. So now we have our project, and sorry, we have our project here, wine API, and the app wines. All right, we'll go through the README. I'll add this to the models. First, I'll go to the settings. I'm going to add wines. And then to the models. So we just have one model, nothing very interesting happening there. And we can't use SQLite when we deploy to Heroku. So we have to use Postgres or some other database. We'll use Postgres. So we have to go into the project settings and change our database from the default SQLite. And then we're going to install the Django REST framework, which is an add-on to Django. Okay. And we'll add that to the apps. Okay, and this is just the basic routes here. And then here we're going to be using the view sets. So there are a couple different ways to do this in the Django REST framework. View sets are kind of the most abstract way of doing it. And when you use view sets, you get access to this router, which will automatically configure your URL patterns for you. So that's totally optional when you make your own projects. If you find that to be convenient, go for it. If you don't, then you're free to manually configure the routes however you like. But just this is an example using view sets and the default router or simple router. So wines URLs. And then our serializers, which you will definitely need. The serializers, again, this is the intermediary. This is the intermediary from Python to JSON and vice versa. So, by the way, I just want to say that depending on what you're doing, you could, you could just use regular Django and then convert everything to JSON in your views, and you would have, you can easily make your own REST API that just deals with JSON using just basic Django. So just I'm just throwing that out there. It's kind of obvious, but I just wanted to mention that. So the Django REST framework is it's a convenience, or it's a more specialized system, but you can certainly do that from scratch. But the serializer is kind of, in some ways, it's the core of what makes Django REST framework the Django REST framework. All right, so it's the serializer, and then the views finally. Okay, so we're using the model view set, and the model view set is by default going to take care of all of the CRUD operations for and it's going to handle list view and detail view. So we make one, we write one view class, and it will basically handle everything that we need for this particular resource. So it's, it's pretty convenient. Okay, so I'm going to try making migrations and then running the server. Okay, I'm going to have to install scicop G2. We'll see. Well, we'll see if this works. Okay. So let me stop this. I don't think I actually created the database. Let me make sure. Wine API. Okay. So I think I did have this before, so let me drop the database. All right, so let me try that again. Make migrations. And migrate. There we go. All right, so now I will try to run the server. Go to /wines. And there we go. So we can add a new one. We can go to the detail view. We can delete it. We can modify it. So all this stuff just comes for free with the view set, as well as the router. So are there any questions about that so far? Okay, so now we'll get to what we're kind of interested in today, is deploying to Heroku. So Heroku, is just one service. It's, it's a good service, especially for testing things out or doing demo apps and things like that. You get we can have 5 projects for free. And if you happen to be familiar with deploying elsewhere, AWS or Azure or in DigitalOcean, anything like that, that's also fine. There's also, especially for the front end, there are more options like Netlify and GitHub pages and stuff like that. So there are a lot of options, but for the backend in particular, I think Heroku is the best default choice for us. Okay, but in order to deploy, we can't just say, here, Heroku, here's my Django app. We have to do some configuration. So you'll, if you don't have an account, you have to create an account. So I'll just show you quickly what this looks like. So if I go to my personal account, you can see I'm maxed out on my free projects. So here is one I created earlier today. This is the endpoint that you're able to access. And you can see there's things like I can view the logs in my settings. I have some configuration variables, some environment variables. This is my secret key here. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. You can also change the domain if you have a project and you want to have a custom domain. So there's all kinds of things you can do here in the panel, and we'll take a look at that. So I'm actually going to delete that project first so I can create another one. Okay. So now this should not work anymore. Done. Okay, so I have a couple links. There's some information from the official docs, and there's also a more detailed if you have more specific use cases or you're just interested in getting more information. So we can go here. So the Heroku docs telling us how to configure Django apps for Heroku. So the first thing you need to do is create something called a proc file. And a proc file is just gonna run some. So we'll talk more about continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines, kind of automating a build process and other things like that. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks, periodically. But you'll need a proc file. So in your project at the root level, you create something called a proc with no extension. It's just proc file. And while we're at it, let's create a git ignore. So we're going to end up what we're going to end up doing is committing this code to Heroku, and then Heroku will build it and deploy it. So let's not commit the virtual environment and PyCache. All right, so this proc file, the one thing that you can have lots of other things in the proc file, but the one thing that you need is this. So the proc file is basically going to have it's basically like hooks. So there are different phases in the deployment lifecycle, and you can hook into them and do certain things. So web is one of those, and when it's at the web phase, you're going to run this command. So Gunicorn, or it's for green unicorn. This is a WSGI server. So this is a Python standard for application servers. You don't need to really worry about what it is, but you need something. So there are other options besides Unicorn, but this is a standard one. So we'll include this in the proc file, and instead of my project, this is actually basically a dummy value here. We'll need the project name, which is wine_API. So wine. And this is actually going to reference this file right here. So this is the API for the WSGI standard, which you don't really need to worry too much about, but this will make it work. Now it's gonna expect something called Unicorn to be installed. So we're gonna have to install that. So pip install Unicorn. All right, and we can just see the our local dependencies so far with pip freeze. So you can see we have Django, the Django REST framework, Unicorn, psycopg, and then a couple other things that I believe Django requires. Okay. So that's kind of the basics from Heroku's perspective. Now there are other things that you're going to have to change in your settings file. You can try going through and doing this manually, and that's fine. We'll actually tweak some of this stuff in a second. But the simplest use case, there's actually a third-party package called Django Heroku, which is actually not maintained anymore, but it still works. So you can use this, and it will basically give you enough defaults to get your application deployed. So we'll also install this, pip install Django Heroku. All right. And then in our settings, we're going to import Django Heroku, and then we're going to call this basically command that's going to create all the configuration that we need. So I'll import that in these settings. And then we'll call this at the bottom. Okay, and the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to have to include a requirementstxt. So all the dependencies that we have and their versions. So pip freeze requirementstxt. And so again, at our root, the root level of our project, we have all of the dependencies that we need. So we picked up a couple more from the Django Heroku. So this DJ database URL and white noise. So we have all of our dependencies. We have the proc file. I think that should be good. So now what I'm going to do is I can create a new, so you can do this on the command line or in the GUI. I'm going to create a new app here. And this app, I'm just going to give it the same name. So this is not a same name. That's fine. So okay, so I've now created this app. I can go there. So there's nothing there, but I've basically reserved this URL. So there's a couple ways you can deploy it. You can use the container registry, which is basically like Docker, if you're using Docker, which we haven't talked about, but you're free to play around with that if you'd like. GitHub, you can also set up GitHub to, you can set up a pipeline with GitHub Actions and other things, but we're not going to worry about that right now, but we might cover that later. And what we're going to do now is Heroku Git. So we're gonna use the command lines of the Heroku command line tools, which I have installed already. So I'm going to log in. Okay, so now I'm logged into Heroku on my command line. And since I haven't created a Git repository or anything, I'm gonna run git init and then add Heroku as a remote here. All right. And then I'll add, commit, and then push to not origin master, but Heroku master. And when I push it, it's going to push up and then it's going to start the build process. And this will take, depending on what you're doing, you know, a minute or so. And it's likely that you'll get some kind of errors. Often these are errors that are sometimes difficult to diagnose, but okay, looks good so far. Okay, so that worked. So now I can visit that endpoint. Go here. Okay, and I have to go to /wines. Okay, so I have a problem here. Any guesses?
Looks like something to do with the model.
Yeah. So when I was running this locally, I had my database, and then I ran migrations, and then I added some stuff to the database. But when I deploy, I just deployed it. I didn't tell it to do anything like run migrations. So these migrations, these files are up there. So these files are hosted now, but I haven't actually run the migrations. So there are a couple things you can do. One, you can run you can actually run a command inside the container. So this is basically like a wrapper. It's a wraparound AWS. It's also a wraparound Docker. So you can run commands like Heroku run. I believe that, so run is a Docker command. So you can execute something inside. We're going to execute a command inside of the container. So where our code is running right now, we can execute this. So we're getting this input, and we can also check out our logs here. So you can see, if you look at the logs from the server, that I ran the starting process with command Python manage.py and so on. So it ran, it was successful. So now we go, you can see that we actually, so we don't have anything in our database because we didn't preload anything. So our database is empty, but now it's configured. It has all of the models. We can add something. That gets added, and our routes should still work. So that all works. Now there are a couple maybe minor issues. So what happens if I go somewhere that doesn't exist? I get this very helpful debug message, which you may not want other users to get. So you can adjust some of those things. If you go to your settings file, so we have debug set to true. So we can change this to false. So there are a couple other things that we should probably change too, like the secret key. Shouldn't do that, but we'll take this one step at a time. So we'll change this to false, and this might break something else, but we'll handle that case. So I've made some changes to my code. So I'm going to recommit, and I'm going to push up to Heroku again, and then Heroku will automatically build what I've pushed up and then redeploy it unless there's an error. So check git status. So git add, git commit, c fix debug. It's Heroku master, not origin master. So now it's going to push all those files up, and it's going to start the build process again. You can also specify, as this is telling you can specify a version of, there's another file you can include here if you need a specific version of Python, which depending on what you're doing. If you're using certain libraries, like TensorFlow, for example, which really only works with Python 3.6. So there are some libraries that are very finicky about what version of Python you're using. So you can also control that. Okay, so this is deployed. I think we're gonna have a problem, but we'll see. So now if I try to go here, I get something which reveals less information about how my application works. And you can also, of course, configure this. This is the default. Did someone else add? Okay. 500,000. 60%, only 60% New Oak. All right, so we have this allowed host. So when we were using this, the Django Heroku, it's kind of taking care of a lot of settings for us. We can actually be more specific about allowed hosts. So we can, now that we have our app deployed here, let me see. Yeah, so we can, this is another security setting that you might want to use, where we're basically making sure that our app knows where it's hosted. So you could have multiple options, but there are certain kinds of attacks. So for example, if you're constructing like links, there's certain kind of attacks where your application may get information about where it's hosted from a request header. So from the host in the request header, and that can be a security vulnerability. So you can minimize that by using the allowed hosts. So let's try redeploying there. Oops. Git and we'll git push Heroku master. It will rebuild yet again. All right, let's see if this still works. Okay, so that's still working. And one other thing we can do is this secret key. So we don't want to commit that. So I've already committed this, so it's too late for this project. But you want to do this beforehand, and you can actually save this. We'll put this in an environment variable, and then in our in the admin panel, you can also do this on the command line. But Heroku will allow you to store configuration or environment variables. So we'll do that. And then here we'll actually read. So we'll read from the environment. So we'll import environ, I believe is the.
Yeah.
Okay. No, we'll do. And we can give this whatever name we want. So I'll just call it, just to make it slightly different. So my secret key. And then I'm going to go into the admin panel, my application, the settings, in this config variable. So this database URL was created from, we didn't have to worry about that. So that was created using that third-party Django Heroku thing we used. So this is going to be our key. So my secret key, we'll paste that in there, which is not what I thought I had copied. It's gone forever now. I guess. Call it my key, and then still a secret. All right, so I'm going to add that. Okay. And then I'm going to redeploy this. And we'll see if this builds properly. So it's actually installing SQLite 3, though it doesn't need to, so we could, that's another thing. So there are a lot of things we could do, and we can automate some of this anyway, but just to show you the basic idea. All right. So it looks like it's still working. Okay, so I think that's good. Are there any questions about that? Heroku deployment. So you don't need to worry about, especially for now, I wouldn't worry about any of like allowed hosts or debug. It's fine for now. But if you want to start practicing that, that would be a good idea. But if it's too much to mess with, then it doesn't really matter.
Can you make it private so that only your front end can access the database? The JSON that's there? Or is that just like public to everyone?
The JSON, you can do something like you can have a whitelist. So there are cores. We can add some cores configuration. So yeah, you can basically restrict it to requests coming from a particular server. So if you had your front end, if you had your React running on another server, your React, that server is going to serve up, code to a client, and then that client is going to end up triggering API requests, but those API requests can go through that server. So yes, you can. I mean, there's lots of other security things you can do. Or not. I mean, you can really go nuts. You can set up an API gateway and have yeah, there's lots of other things you can do for security, but I'm not too worried about my Bravo Wine API getting overwhelmed. Okay, yeah, so that's it then. So Heroku, it can be kind of a pain. There's a lot of steps you have to go through, and it's easy to skip something and then things don't work and it's hard to tell what's happening. So if please let me know if you're having issues. Basically, don't spend hours trying to get your application to deploy. And then the challenge for today, I'll stop recording.